With us, we are now in the last day of the Publishing Insiders Summit. You guys are the hardcore, guys and gals are the hardcore, but we have a great day lined up for you. We're starting a little bit late, sorry about that, but first off, I just want to give a shout out to everyone yesterday, all of our speakers yesterday. We had a great lineup, I think. We heard about what is going on with the Facebook live streaming, the problems of monetizing it. I think there was an admission that it is very early days and we don't really know how to monetize it yet, but we're working on it. We also we had a presentation from Ashish Patel from Now This Media, and by the way, Now This just announced this morning that it is merging with some other companies, Thrillist, The Dodo, and Seeker, with some investment, I believe, from Discovery Networks. And we also heard about the after the pre-roll, the promise of native content on video and branded content, and how to get beyond the pre-roll, which would be great because we've been saying we're gonna get beyond the pre-roll for like 10 years and it still hasn't happened. And lastly, we had a great presentation from Derek Flansreich from Greatest on reaching millennials. I thought that was really powerful. A lot of insights there. But now on day 3, I'm going to kick it off with a keynote presentation by Haley Romer from The Atlantic. She's going to talk about how basically over the last decade they have reinvented a venerable brand. I think that just means it goes all the way back to the 19th century, so it's now in its 3rd century of existence. And what they're doing and the strategy going forward. So Haley, if you can come on up, please give her a hand. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I feel like the last morning of any conference, the obligatory opening statement is, I get the coveted spot of the 8:45 last day of a conference. But anyway, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk about some of the things that we've done at The Atlantic or things that we've been up to at The Atlantic. Just a quick show of hands, how many of you are familiar with The Atlantic and our history? Little bit. Okay, I talk about this for a living, so I'm gonna talk about it for a quick second. We're 159 years old this year, so next year we'll be 160 years old, which means we've been around for a long time. For those of you that don't know, we were founded to be a platform for big ideas and thinking that would help shape the world or the future of this country. Actually, we were founded to be a platform to help shape, help illuminate the American idea. And one of the things that our founders, who were this group of really radical thinkers, one of the things that they really felt strongly about at the time was the need to abolish slavery, which in 1857 was not a popular idea. And it wasn't something that it was not a widespread belief, right? This country had been founded on the backs of slaves, and so people didn't really talk about it. So it was a really radical notion at the time. Anyway, I say all this because we made a little bit of noise last week in the press when we made just our 3rd presidential endorsement in 159 years. The first one was Lincoln. And the reason we had endorsed Lincoln, who actually did not run on the platform of abolishing slavery, but the reason we had endorsed Lincoln was because our founders felt like it was the only foreseeable path or the only reasonable path that we could ever get to a place where we would abolish slavery. That's why they made the endorsement. The second endorsement was 1964, was of Johnson, and not because we had believed so strongly in Johnson, but because we felt like electing Goldwater would really turn the country back or put the country in a backwards position from a civil rights perspective. And then last week, of course, we had endorsed Hillary, really making the case against Donald Trump and saying, just taking a look at his beliefs on minorities and women in particular, and felt like the future, once again, of our country is at stake. And the reason I bring this up is because over the course of 3 different centuries, there's a common thread here. And really what it is that The Atlantic is championing the American idea. And the reason it's so important for me to understand and be able to articulate that, and the reason I think it's so important for our audiences to know that, is because in order for us to move forward, we really do have to understand why we were founded, what it is we set out to do, and this can then be the sort of launch pad for anything that we do moving forward. So that's the common thread over the course of the past 3 centuries from an editorial perspective, at least from a political perspective. But the thing that we do more than anything else is we commit ourselves to challenging and exploring ideas across all subject areas. So it's not just politics, of course. The way in which we articulate it at The Atlantic is we like to say that we question answers. And questioning answers is something that I think was true of us back in 1857, although I wasn't there to see it. But reading back through some of our old content, I get the sense that that's exactly what we had set out to do. Question answers is the way in which we articulate it today. But it's true of everything, not just about our editorial content, but that's the philosophy in which we also run our business. So about 10 years ago, when we started to look at the future of media and see major disruption, that was the first issue of The Atlantic magazine right there, The Atlantic Monthly it was called at the time. We started to question what the future of media was going to look like, and we questioned the answer of whether or not it would be in a magazine format. We weren't convinced that 150 years from then, The Atlantic would exist in the format of a magazine. So at that time, we said, you know what, we have to do something to totally change the way we think about the future. It will not be moving away from what our core ideals are or why we exist. We do want to continue to question answers, but what it means is we're going to gain a deeper understanding of the channels in which we can create media, can reach audiences, can speak to people, and continue to do things that are leading the industry as we always have been. People ask me this question all the time, what is your revenue? In 2011, we made a little bit of noise because we had, for the first time ever, hit 50-50 in terms of our digital and print ratio of revenue. And I think it's worth noting that today, because we did question the answers of what the future of media was, we're at about 20% print. This is advertising revenue specifically, but 20% print and 80% digital. So it's exciting for us to be in a position where we are not necessarily beholden to legacy advertising dollars. We can embrace the future, but we do still think that print plays a really important role in our ecosphere. But this is really where we are today. So you'll hear lots of people talk about how we have a digital-first approach, we have a mobile-first approach. We at The Atlantic believe that we are audience-first, no matter what. So again, going back to that guiding principle, or going back to understanding why we were founded and what our mission is, our goal is to make sure that we are putting our audience first. They are accessing The Atlantic how they want to, where they want to, but they recognize that it is still The Atlantic, the very fabric of which they came to us in the first place. What that means, well, it means a few different things. First, know where they're consuming content. I think most of us in this room understand the importance of knowing where your audience is. This is important not just because you want to be able to tell people where they are or try to get them to come back to you, but because I think that once you understand what it is you're trying to communicate with them, you have to understand the platforms that they're engaging with, and then think through how you translate yourself on those platforms, if in fact it makes sense. Not every platform makes sense for every single publisher, of course. But today you will find us on desktop. You'll have a mobile web version, of course, and we're even experimenting with platforms like Facebook Instant Articles and Google AMP. I said a second ago that print plays a really important role in our ecosphere, and the way in which we think about the printed magazine is that we think of the cover actually as the most important real estate in all of media. We think that when we put a story on the cover of a magazine, the statement that it makes is way more impactful than it would make if you simply put it up online. This is one of the reasons why we continue to print the magazine. Having said that, in July, August, we went to an unprecedented second printing of our issue because we sold out on newsstands across the country. So for those people who say print is dead or people are only engaging with content on other platforms, we're not finding that to be the case at all, despite the fact that all of our print content is accessible for free on our site. So knowing where your audience is obviously critical, but knowing the formats that they prefer too. So it's one thing to say, okay, we know that they're on Facebook, but okay, if they're on Facebook, what are they reading on Facebook? What are they doing? How are they accessing your content? And so on this point, I think we like to experiment a lot. We want to understand, the formats that they want to play with and see what gains traction, what is successful. But again, going back to thinking through how you translate your brand for each format, that's really important for us. So knowing how people prefer to engage with content is really important. Eric just mentioned Facebook Live. We've been experimenting with Facebook Live and actually seeing a ton of success. I wouldn't say a ton of commercial success, but a ton of audience engagement with Facebook Live. We've been building audiences there, and one of the things that we're seeing is that the more live things we post on Facebook or host on Facebook, we're building an audience, and they're coming back to us, engaging with the content, even when it's not being live streamed. But around the elections in particular, we've used that as the opportunity to experiment with so many different formats and platforms, Facebook Live being one of them, but we've been doing this live debate blog during the live blog during the debates, which has also been really successful for us, and we've seen people keep coming back, and over the course of, so it's tough to say whether it's the debate itself, what's happening, or the anticipation of the debate itself, or the anticipation of what the Atlantic is going to say during the debate itself. But I think probably the combination of the two, we're seeing audiences grow from the first debate to the second, and I think we expect the third to do the same. But 360 video is another great example. That's another new-ish format that we're playing with and saying, okay, we've got this audience, specifically as it related to the debates, or this was at the conventions. How do we tell the story of what's happening here? How can we give people information and access to things that they wouldn't otherwise get in a new format? And they used it. So 360 video is something that we've been testing, again, thinking through the right ways and the right place to do that. And above all else, delivering provocative, inspiring ideas, storytelling really is what this is talking about. We're really well known at the Atlantic for storytelling and talking about provocative things, really engaging people through the use of big ideas and great ways to tell it. And for us, as I said before, question answers is a philosophy, not just from an editorial perspective, but also for our business. And so providing great storytelling experiences is something that's really important to us, both on the edit and the business side. And then speaking of the business side, how many of you are familiar with Atlantic Rethink? One person, two. Okay. So Atlantic Rethink is the name of our in-house branded content studio. We officially named it Atlantic Rethink, I want to say almost 3 years ago now. It's no coincidence that the name harkens back to the notion of question answers, because our philosophy is meant to be similar to what we do from an editorial perspective, right? We want to give people access to great thinking and great ideas in new and exciting ways and experiences. So our name is reflective of our philosophy. We're seeing a lot of our advertising partners gravitate toward the idea that we can create great storytelling experiences that are provocative and engaging through the lens of Atlantic-y type content. This is native in sensibility and format. What we like to say for us, native is a sensibility, not a format, meaning if you come to the Atlantic.com or anywhere where you would find our sponsor content, the goal for us is not to have native advertising look just like the rest of our site and have people think that it is standard editorial content. It's native in sensibility, meaning we hold ourselves to the highest quality standard possible in terms of storytelling, in terms of journalistic integrity, in terms of providing value to our readers in ways that they may not otherwise get through advertising experiences. But in terms of the format, when we say native in format, what we mean there is also our commitment to providing people with great experiences and testing new formats that are going to be engaging. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I think because we're some publishers in the room, it's worth noting that as our business has evolved, as our brand has evolved, as time has evolved, one of the questions that I frequently get is, who are your competitors these days? How has that evolved? Has that changed at all? And in fact, it's changed, and it's constantly changing, and it's changed quite rapidly. I started at the Atlantic about 4.5 years ago, and I would say that we probably had 2 or 3 main competitors when I started, and by and large, I never really hear about them today. People never really say, it's the Atlantic, or I won't say who. But where we find ourselves, you could guess, where we find ourselves most often competing because of the makeup of our business, because 80% of our revenue is digital, about 75% of that could be attributed to custom content, working with partners and creating custom content. We find ourselves most often competing with large and highly credible in-house branded content studios more than anyone else. The other thing I should say is, sometimes people call us and say, okay, we're looking at you and we're looking at BuzzFeed for this content program. What do you think? and we say, okay, well, let's talk about it. What is the goal? Because, we have two different objectives. They're terrific, I'm sure, and really creative. But, just depending on what people want to do, you never know. So this is an example of a program that went live yesterday. This is with Nest, the Nest camera. I'm sure most of us are familiar with that. We love this program because it is such an awesome example of great storytelling. So what we did here was create a story of how the home can be a sanctuary using new tools. But one of the things we found using researchers, psychologists, law enforcement, is that over the course of the past several decades, as new tools have become available to people to become more safe, people are actually way more anxious than ever before. You've got these loud blaring alarms. I mean, you have access to information, 24/7 news, things you don't want to know about, but you feel like you need to since you can. So through some of these research studies, what we found is actually if you have the right tools in place, there could be a sense of calm that you can create for yourself. And so what we did was tell this story, first in a print perspective, so it's just come out in our issue. I'm not sure if it's even hit newsstands yet, but it's coming out this week. But the digital experience went live yesterday on our site, and it's a really exciting way to tell the story of what sanctuary looks like today. And then, of course, nicely weaving in Nest, but what it does, we think, is give our readers value in terms of understanding what's changed in terms of home security over the course of the past couple of decades, what's changed in law enforcement and psychology, and all these different ways to sort of think about whether or not you actually are safer or less. There's a lot of talk about whether or not we're safer or less safe today than we were, let's say, 25 years ago. But our readers are interested in that. They want to know the facts. They want to think differently about, why is it we feel less safe, if in fact we are more safe? So we're giving them that kind of information through native content, brought to you by a sponsor, which we think is really valuable. This next example is a program that we recently did, or it's the second part of a program that we worked on with Porsche. And this is live on our site now. Porsche wanted to be associated with thrills, or the idea that if you're driving a Porsche, it can be a thrilling experience. And thinking through how you might tell that story is, I think, deeply complex. So the way in which we tried to break it down, or the way in which we did break it down, actually, was that we went out and found, we did a little bit of research. Again, we're big on the research. But we did a little bit of research to identify 4 types of personalities and where they fall on a sort of thrill-seeking spectrum. And we identified these personalities, found people who embody them, and told these stories in a digital experience. The next part was a video series, and I'll show you this video. Because I think when you think of storytelling, you think of adding value, as we started with this really immersive experience digitally that did not initially include video, it was a way for people to sort of go in, click on different things, have more information sort of popping at them, but all the while telling this great experience. The next phase here was take it to a storytelling, take it to a video level and provide new perspective on it. So I think we can play. I'll just show you this example.
There's a never-ending stream of stimulation. It can seem impossible to be in the moment. We all crave that feeling of being fully present and engaged. But what we don't realize is that this craving is tied to an age-old human impulse: thrill-seeking. "50,000 years ago, our ancestors faced constant danger. To survive, they evolved to feel fear. To harness that fear, they developed an ability to focus intensely under pressure. And when they did, it triggered a powerful emotional payoff. Today, we know this experience as thrill, and the desire for it is coded into our DNA. With the right trigger, every bodily function not engaged in the moment shuts down. All our senses heighten, and adrenaline, testosterone, and endorphins flood the brain and body. Thrill feels incredible. When we think about being present in the modern world, we rarely think about thrill, but nothing connects us to our immediate surroundings and to ourselves, like activating the survival instincts that we inherited from our ancestors. So how do we do that? We create a feeling of perceived risk or unknown that sets these responses in motion. Different people do it in different ways, but the payoff is the same. When it's all over, we bask in the joy of thrill.
I love that video because maybe because I spend way too many months in the details of the content of it. But what it does is, in just a minute's time, several things. First of all, it goes deep into storytelling about the type of person that would perhaps drive one of these cars. But you might identify with certain aspects of it in your own personality. You get to learn a little bit about the fact that if you are a thrill seeker, that's something that might be hard-coded in you, right? So you're kind of learning as you're seeing this little bit about Porsche. But at the same time, we're experimenting with different formats. If you saw some of the animation in there, our team was so excited. So they put this video together and they spend months on end, editing and going through it. And then somebody says, wait a second, what if we just add this in and throw this in and start to animate it and start to bring this brain to life? And you have that tiger lion thing right there. Those are the types of things that get our team really excited, because as somebody's watching this type of video, it's like, wow, that is really cool. And it makes it even that much more engaging. So those are the types of things that we're doing. Again, when you think about questioning answers, as we think of it through the lens of video, it's not just, filming something and showing it, but then how do we take it to the next level? How do we show more? How do we continue to enhance the story using this new format? It's all really exciting for us, and I don't know if it's completely the future, but I think that we'll continue to experiment on that. And again, because I think that a lot of us in this room are publishers or from this side of the business, I think it's important to understand how the business is evolving, because while these programs come together and you can in just a minute see this content and think, oh, that's great, you don't have any real sense for the type of work, or those of us who are creating it, we know, but anytime you see a video, you don't have any real sense for the type of work that's gone into it. And so I often get asked, what's the secret to your success? The Atlantic is growing and doing so well. We hear tons about it. Why? And it probably comes down to one thing, singularly, I think, and that's talent. We have the most incredibly talented group of people who are so committed to the future of this brand and the mission of the Atlantic, and ensuring that the mission lives on, that they're willing to experiment with anything. They do not want to deviate from our core values. But as it relates to the business, what's happened is, so publishers, show of hands, people on, right, of media companies. So you used to have this setup where you'd have the client, you'd have a sales team and the marketing team. So the client would say, here's what I want to do. The sales team would relay it to marketing, and then the sales team would give it back to the client. Over the course of the past couple of years, that's changed dramatically. And so we've had to totally reshape our organization. In fact, we're going through another restructuring, if you will, just in how we set up our teams to be prepared to handle clients. But this is more what it looks like today, right? You've got the client where basically everybody at the organization is in touch with them. The sales and marketing teams have become complex organizations in and of themselves, right? To understand what's happening in the market, or as I had said, about 75% of our revenue is coming from custom content. Our marketing team is so complex. I don't even know what team anybody's on anymore. I can't even keep it straight. That's a joke. I know them all. But it's exciting because you've got strategy, you've got execution, you have content, you have design, you have development. I mean, there are so many working parts, and it's impossible to say what is the most important, right? I mean, you need to win the business, of course, but there's no chance you're going to win the business back if you don't execute on it right. And if you have one person who simply doesn't care enough, then it can all sort of go wrong. So I say that I think talent is the secret to our success. When I say that, I mean it completely. So this is how we've reshaped the organization to address what's happening in the media today. Thinking about, the reasons that we've grown, I often say that I think one of our biggest challenges at the Atlantic is staying true to who we are while the touch points become more diffuse. And I think that's probably a challenge for any brand, any publisher specifically. But to my earlier point, the thing that we've done really, really well has been to continue to go back inside of ourselves and understand, what it is we're about, what it is we want to express, regardless of the format. how we convey the message of The Atlantic or whatever the message is that we're bringing forth, and continue to challenge ourselves, explore new ways of doing it, and then make sure that that philosophy is not simply an editorial proposition where you might have a business that doesn't mirror that. For us, the success has been in the fact that everyone across the organization is dedicated to that philosophy and championing all ideas across both an editorial and a business perspective, and then setting ourselves up from a business perspective to make sure we understand the market today, but again, being committed to translating what it is we do at The Atlantic, regardless of the platform. And that's it, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Haley let me know that she has a hard stop at 9:30, so I'm going to try and get her out by 9:25. But that leaves us 5 minutes or so for Q&A. If anyone has any questions, just raise your hand. I have a question to start off. When I grew up with The Atlantic, I love it. That was a long time ago. But when I was reading it, people would
160 years?
No, not that long. When I was reading it, people would sometimes make fun of me because I was like a little, 12-year-old reading The Atlantic, and so back then it was not perceived as a youthful brand. I think it's safe to say. Now, what are you doing to reach out to the millennials and make sure that the brand stays current and builds a millennial audience base?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny you say that. I would say that I think so much has changed in all of those years since you were small. No, I think so much has changed. First
I'm not
of all,
a millennial. I'm not a millennial. I'm not even claiming.
One of the things is, and I think it would be hard to argue this, I think being smart is cooler now than it ever was before. The Atlantic is not simply about being smart, but I think that the notion of challenging or provoking thought, challenging ideas and provoking thought on the most important issues of our time is something that's really resonating with people now. And I would say that millennials are known to be more on top of the issues as a younger generation than previous generations had been at that time. So from a content perspective, actually, we're not seeing any challenge there whatsoever. People are engaging with us. It's about 30% of our audience is millennial now. And we have about 30 million uniques on our site every month. So if we're reaching, somewhere between 30, 35 million people every month, and 30% of them are millennials, I think we're doing pretty well. Part of that, too, is because of the formats, making ourselves available and accessible wherever people are consuming content, wherever, but as soon where we think it makes sense, and in due time. I think that's also something that it's a reason why part of our audience is that younger generation, which is great, a significant part and a growing part. The other thing is experimenting with format. I mean, you can tell a great story. You could do it in 16,000 words, or you could do it in a 2-minute animated video series that makes you understand something, really quickly, and it seems really cool. This is a really cool stat that it sounds like a plug for The Atlantic, but it's actually true. I got a call at the end of last year from a company called Chartbeat. Are we familiar with Chartbeat? So they measure engagement on the web, and they said, we're putting out a story about the top 20 most engaged with pieces of content on the web in 2015. We'd like to include you in there. I said, okay, well, tell me a little bit more about it. How are you defining engagement? And they said, well, by the number of viewers to the content and the time that they spent there. So the metric was a combination of the two. How much content, I asked him, how much content did you measure? He said 80 million articles. It wasn't everything on the web, but we looked at 80 million pieces of content. It wasn't just articles. It was videos, articles, infographics, everything that was on the web. I said, okay, well, so 80 million pieces of content. You narrowed it down to 20. Where's The Atlantic? And he said, well, actually, you're number one, so we'd like to show you off. And I said, the number one most engaged with piece of content on the web in 2015 was from The Atlantic. What piece was it? I don't know. Anybody want to guess? It was a 16,000-word essay on what ISIS really wants. 16,000 words, most engaged with piece on the web.
I read that.
So I don't use that to point out that The Atlantic is all about long form, because we're not. I think we do great stories, even in short animated video series. But the point is that people want to learn. They're more curious than ever, and they have access to the content everywhere. So that was a pretty incredible statistic, I felt. So in all of 2015, right, the most engaged with piece of content came from us. I had nothing to do with writing it, so I don't take credit for it from that perspective. I just get to brag about it.
Awesome. Yeah, that was a great piece, and very sobering. I would read it.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
It was really lighthearted.
I'll hold the. I'm afraid I have a cold.
Oh, okay. This is interesting. I'm Maya from Little Things. I guess my question is, and I am a millennial, but when I click on The Atlantic, like I have an expectation that I'm going to read something like that's intellectual, thought-provoking, and definitely not an ad. So, what was your distribution strategy for the Porsche video? Like, how did you distribute that to an audience that really expects not, I would say, not branded content and not a commercial come at them? And what kind of viewership did you get on that?
I don't have the total viewership numbers for that now, but I'm curious, why do you say the audience expects not to have content from advertisers?
Like if I was encountering an Atlantic article, I wouldn't click on it and expect to see a Porsche advertisement.
Would you expect to see another advertisement?
No, like that video itself, did you distribute it as like in an article?
Okay.
Or did you distribute it as like at the bottom of an article or as
Gotcha.
pre-roll is my question.
Gotcha. We put in place a pretty robust distribution plan, which includes in ad units, right? So it would be, I don't want to say standard because they're not IAB standard ads, but we do have designated places on our site where we distribute custom content. We do also have it live within an environment or an experience that we created for Porsche. So if you found an article, it's labeled sponsor content, but if you found an article that would say the science of the thrill, it would have a header and then sort of just a description of it, and you clicked on it, that video would live there as well. We also have a video channel on our site, so you would discover it amongst other videos, but again, clearly labeled that it's from a sponsor.
Got another one over there.
Hi, I'm Helene Dina with Defy Media. I'm wondering if you've published in instant articles, and if so, what you've seen in terms of engagement and whether you've adjusted the length of the types of articles you published in there, given the environment.
We do publish within instant articles. We were initially a beta partner, and we've been working with them ever since. And in terms of the engagement, I think that it's a little bit shorter than the engagement that we see on our own site directly. Having said that, we have not necessarily adjusted the length of things that we're publishing. We just publish most things that we publish on our site into instant articles, and we'll test out new formats as it relates to native, or we'll push other types of things in there as they evolve. But for now, we're not adjusting the content based on the length of time that people spend there.
Okay.
Hi, Charles Pankey, Epiphany AI. I'm just kind of wondering how the Atlantic's going to keep up with the changing U.S. demographic. All due respect to the millennial generation, you have, the Hispanic Latino population rising at a great rate. African American population maybe not quite as much, but how do you keep up with the changing U.S. demographic and stay relevant to that urban demographic and to people of color, and bring in a bigger audience from that area to the Atlantic?
That's a good question. I think that understanding, so it goes back to understanding your audience, who they are, and then where you want to grow, right? Identifying areas of opportunity for growth, for sure. One of the things I didn't say, I don't know if you were here for the beginning of my presentation, I talked about how we were founded to be a vehicle for ideas that would help shape the world and help shape thinking across the world. One of the things I didn't say is that we were also founded to be of no party or clique. So we were very deliberately, one of the reasons it's important, we've only made 3 endorsements, but we were very deliberately straight down the middle. We don't believe that we should tell people how they should specifically feel on one side of an issue or another. But what we do is try to write about things and have them think differently about things regardless of the issues. I think our goal is to be inclusive and accessible. And so we're writing about all sorts of issues. I mean, as it relates to race specifically, I think The Atlantic has been undoubtedly the leader on some major topics of race. I mean, Ta-Nehisi Coates is one of our writers, and he published an essay making the case for reparations a couple of years ago, which sparked a national conversation, or brought back the idea of reparations, which nobody was even talking about, and it made this issue something that people did want to talk about and did care about and start debating on. We talk about mass incarceration, specifically as it relates to race and the effects on various demographics and the shifting demographics, what it does for the future of our children and for the future of this country. I'm not an editor, so I can't sound as good as they could if they were talking about these issues, but my point is simply that we only intend to and want to be accessible and be relevant to everybody who wants to access us. So it's never our intention to try to exclude any one demographic or only write about things that would appeal to any one demographic.
Okay. Now, Haley, you have your calls you have to go. So can we please give her a big hand? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. And
So I'm going to very briefly introduce our three panelists, but then I'm going to turn it to them for a minute or two and have them talk a little bit more in depth about, in some cases, it might be a site or a company you're less familiar with, or in the case of Huffington Post, one that's changing. So on my immediate left is Julia Beiser, who is the head of product for Huffington Post. Previously, Julia and I were colleagues at the Washington Post. Next to Julia is Tyler Love, the Chief Technology Officer for Bustle. Previously, Tyler was a software engineer for Tumblr, Bleacher Report, Paperless Post, among others. And then finally, on our far left is Leo Rezik. And Leo is the co-founder of Resignation Media, based here in Austin, the parent company of The Chive, Barry, and other sites. So why don't we start with Julia and just tell us a little bit about, since Ariana announced that the Huffington Post will not be led by Ariana, what's going on?
Yeah, sure. So time's a big change at the Huffington Post. Obviously, our founder and former editor-in-chief decided to move on a couple months ago. Ariana is an amazing person. She's one of the people who hired me. She's really fantastic. And as someone who's been in digital my whole career, always really looked up to her. You know, where we are today is we sort of have this opportunity to chart really what Chapter 2 is for this great brand that started at such a small site and now is one of the biggest sites on the internet. So we're investing very heavily in product. That's my role. Product, tech, and design report into me. And what great user-facing experiences we can build out in support of customers. On top of this, in the corporate universe, our parent company, Verizon, acquired Yahoo, or is in the process of trying to acquire Yahoo. So we have a great opportunity to leverage a ton of technology from Verizon, AOL, Yahoo, in addition to build our own. It's a pretty exciting time to be there.
So Tyler, tell us about Bustle. I believe founded in 2013?
Yes.
Great.
Bustle is about 3.5 years old, or we launched 3.5 years ago. I've been working on it for the last 4 years. In that time, we've grown from 0 to 50 million or more monthly active users. So it's been very rapid growth for a new publisher. We are now a very product-focused media company and trying to get out ahead of the old way of thinking of advertising and building interactive products for our users and our demographic.
Leo.
Thank you. Leo Ressig, co-founder and CEO of Resignation Media. As Arby said, that is the parent company to two media companies, our flagship site, thechive.com, and that was founded in 2008. Shortly thereafter, we founded the Barry, which is the less politically correct version is Chive for Chicks. And then we have three e-commerce sites that we've been able to build under the media properties. One's the Chivery, and then Buy Me Brunch, and then a new golf line we're launching with Bill Murray right now called William Murray Golf. And this is usually the opportunity when publishers tell you what they're number one at and what they're doing different that no one else is doing. Our claim to fame is we're number one in comedy. Thank you, ComScore. And then number two is we're launching a new OTT product called Chive TV. And a lot of publishers are coming out with their OTT version to distribute content, whereas we're using it as a digital out-of-home platform. So we're licensing a ton of content online, basically taking 5-hour looping compilations and providing Roku sticks to bars. And we're in about 1,000 bars right now. And so a lot of people are polling their audience. We're kind of pushing out to our audience and discovering a whole new desire to advertise on out-of-home. So that's kind of what we're doing different right now.
Great. So thought we would start with, we had a little pre-conversation about a week ago to sort of talk about this panel. And the more I heard about how each of them is sort of both defining and attacking the issues of user experience, what became clear is just how really expansive it is. You know, it might be a redesign, it might be a content management system, it might be moving into entirely new areas like immersive virtual reality. So I'm just going to start with, you know, can you give us insight in your world of just how much maybe broader the conversation about user experience is today than it might have been even a couple of years ago? Just jump in.
Sure. I actually think a really great example with Bustle for how user experience has changed or shifted our perception about how to build products is we've had a handful of experimental or prototype products that wound up being very successful, both in terms of what native advertisers wanted to be next to as far as a product experience, as well as building really engaging content. It almost took us for a surprise. And that was really letting engineers think about what could be done in a web browser and seeing how that translates to products. And we wound up with, the best example is our interactive flow charts. That was a for fun product that turned into now our most successful native advertising product just by sheer chance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say, I've spent my whole career working in journalism, right? So first at the Washington Post, now working over at Huffington Post. And I remember some very early conversations at the Washington Post, and I noted that if you were the first person to invoke the user, you would usually win, right? You'd be arguing about how to do something, and then someone would be like, but what about the user? And I'd be like, oh, that guy, he's right, you know? Now everyone's doing that. Right? It's not just one guy at a meeting who kind of raises his hand and says, oh, but user experience. Now everybody is really thinking about the user in a different way. That's a huge shift for traditional media where I come from, which is a lot about what we have to say, not about what they want to consume. And so I think that shift has been really significant in the businesses we work on, and it's vital. If you look at who our competitive set is, it's not CNN or the New York Times, so of course it may be, but it's anything a user can do with their leisure time. And all of those companies, Facebook and YouTube and you name it, are very focused on the user experience. So to bring that up to the forefront, I think has been great for our end consumers. It's a lot different than kind of the broadcast distribution that, at least in news, we've been doing for so long.
Leo?
Yeah, I'd say our approach to UX isn't product first. It's not content first. It's not community first. Or monetization first. We literally look at it as all four legs of one stool, and we don't put one in front of the other. Yes, content built the Chive as to what it is right now because we basically built a viral website before, as the word viral was coming into people's lexicons. But these days, and having been here a few days and listened to how people are engaging with their community, and they may not be monetizing that community. We put that right up at the forefront too, and so we take each leg of that stool and we put a line of what not to cross. On content, don't cross this line. We don't talk about politics. We don't talk about religion. Product, don't give them a shitty user experience, right? It's pretty much that simple. Have a fast performing site and great content to back it up, and people keep coming back, and then marry that across our O&O properties. We have a very large app user base. We were really fortunate early on to dive right into the app world, probably 4 or 5 years ago. And we were blessed with about 20 million free downloads where that would cost a lot of money to get these days, and you don't even know if they're gonna open your app. So it's kind of marrying the user experience across the O&Os and then certain content working on other social platforms as needed. So it's spinning plates, really.
So when I was looking at my notes on that pre-conversation, one of you said, and the quote was, you need to put the user at the center of the experience. And we've talked a little bit about, part of it is just the user being in the conversation the way you described. It could be the fact that many people now are responsible in a newsroom or organization rather than a few. But can each of you talk about other ways specifically that you're working to tangibly put the user at the center of the experience? Why don't we start with you, Julie?
Sure. Well, I was at a Bezos-led company for a while, and at Amazon, they famously leave an empty chair at meetings, and that's for the customer, which I think is, a gimmick in a lot of ways. It was actually a really helpful construct. The way we fold the user into our teams is a lot of data analysis. Looking at what your data is telling you, it's a little bit like, when people pull together fossils and all of a sudden they create a human being out of them, and they're like, how did they make that human being out of those fossils? I mean, they don't all necessarily add up to great storylines. You got to squint your eyes at the data, figure out what stories and what insights you can drive from them, and then make some bets on where you want to go. So for me, it's a lot of data, trying to inform kind of what are our users doing and how can we optimize that experience.
Tyler.
Yeah, for us too, it's been a lot of data crunching, but not really any very technical analysis. We've been doing event and metric tracking on all of our products, especially the new ones that we roll out. And we've really just found that taking a look at the aggregate data of what people are interacting with on a product, how they're clicking through to something, has actually then informed not just what changes we make to get more engagement out of our products, but also the conversations that the product team starts having after the fact. So when we've done this, made this button on a page larger or placed it right here, that we get a 10% increase in engagement, for example, we then know during the next product discussion that those experiments start to inform our conversations. So the product team, the design, the engineering team is actually thinking and speaking on behalf of the users.
Yeah, and we take a similar approach to what you were mentioning as the empty seat. We do actually treat the Chive community as giving them a voice to interact with the site. We launched a new, section of the site called iChive this year. For years, we've been getting probably 5,000 to 10,000 user submissions every day. It's kind of been the backbone of the content on the site. And only recently have we started gamifying that experience. So not only will you get attribution when we use a photo that you submitted in a gallery, or we're actually giving our users to create galleries on our behalf, they get points for that. And kind of bring it full circle, they get points to be redeemed in the Chivery. So they not only get the recognition, but they actually, if they interact enough with the community, then they get free stuff essentially. And it's just imagine Imager with gamification that led to dollars. So
I want to shift now to advertising, and particularly editorial relationship with advertising. I know you're all sort of different in the way your companies are structured, but where are we right now in terms of whether the ad user experience and the editorial user experience are sort of caught up with each other, or is one tending to drag another down? I'll open it. Why don't you start, Leo?
Yeah, I'll take that. I'd say these days we don't let the tail wag the dog. I think early on, when everyone was starting their fill-in-the-blank studio, yes, we've got a brand studio. Here's a cool trailer of what we can do. We did that. We're privately funded. We've never taken on any capital, and so we spend money with precision these days. And to that end, we kind of built the trophy case of here's some cool branded content on the video end. Branded content on photo galleries is really easy. I'm not going to sugarcoat that one. Pretty much a 7th grader could do it. But to that end, we've taken an approach like, look, we've got the trophy case for brands to look at. We've got 15, 16 people in-house that are dedicated to, integrated marketing in this sense, that are working with the brands and the sales team to bring sponsored content to life. But we're not shooting something first and selling it second. We'll sell it first and shoot it second. Because at the end of the day, we don't want our editorial or production team compromised with creative output. And it's just, again, it's that balance of content versus advertising, and, don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining type of thing, so.
How's it work at Bustle?
Similar to that, but I think we also have to balance out the actual ad impressions and fulfilling IAB units. We have massive volume of ad inventory we have to fulfill. So the way that we're looking at it, though, is by building better native and branded experiences that we can get ahead of that and actually increase the value of what we're selling to ad buyers. So we're building products, thinking about the best possible experience for the user, and then going forward and showing that to advertisers and hoping that that starts to shift from millions of impressions of 300 by 250 units to like, oh, like this is actually a better way for this brand to, look good on Bustle.
And we're a scale operation, so we've slightly different game. We have we obviously love our direct advertisers. We try to do great stuff in native, and I think we're showing some really big success there, particularly in like immersive and virtual reality formats. We've done some really interesting partnerships with advertisers, including we're partnering with Elle, doing a virtual reality kind of phone experience for their cover, where we're the tech powering an AR experience. If you look at Elle's cover this month, you'll see something cool, courtesy of Riot Studios, a company we acquired in April. That being said, also on the site, to get to part of your question, we do a lot of great work at AOL. Our AOL tech stack for ads and programmatic is really, really robust and awesome. Obviously there's a lot of work the industry needs to do at large to speed up those load times. Every time you're doing all those calls to get the perfect programmatic buyer, audience in front of this piece of content, it's slowing down the site. So I think things like the AMP project are trying to take that on, and certainly we on the O&O side do a lot of work to optimize the load times across our experiences, ads included, to make sure those are good experiences. But I think, to Arby's point, it is kind of a cat and mouse. We're all trying to up-level the experience for users because, again, someone like a Facebook, they're going to solve that problem. And so, as publishers, if we want to compete on our O&Os and make those experiences great, we have to solve it as well.
So speaking of that, I was at a dinner a couple of weeks ago with the founder of Google News, and we were just talking about Facebook Instant Articles, Google AMP, Apple News, and he offered the theory that this was essentially just sitting there for Facebook and Google and others because so many publishers and editors did a poor job with user experience. So I wanted to first get reaction to that and then also say, how do you think about the reality of Instant Articles, Google AMP? So Julia, why don't we start with you?
Sure, I've given this one a lot of thought, and I've done a lot of work on the off-platform distribution, as I'm sure we all have. But I think that, publishers get a lot of the blame in this conversation, but the industry at large didn't take a very considered look at what digital display advertising was going to look like, let alone mobile display advertising, and how that was going to translate to experience. We looked at all these things like puzzle pieces, put them all together, and put them out there on the internet. Again, thinking about what we have and want to put out in the world versus what people wanted to take in. And I think what you've seen is something like Facebook Instant and Google AMP is actually a great catalyst for us as an industry. When I was at the Washington Post, we were very, very aggressive about testing our own page load. Bringing all of our sites over to HTTPS, requiring our advertisers to do the same. We really wanted to have a fast, secure site. And that's a huge uphill battle in this industry. But I think with our various partners in the industry, Facebook and Google, taking this on, we have a bigger force for the user to say, hey, look, everyone cares about experience. It's a silent feature. Your users know it. We've seen at the various sites I've worked at, people use Instant Articles more often during the week than they do with your regular site. And I think what that tells us is it's the subconscious fact of knowing I'm not going to have to wait for that that really matters to people. So, I think publishers did miss an opportunity, but I think we have a tremendous opportunity now to really jump on it. Everyone knows in this industry, in digital content, as broad as you want to make it, knows this is a problem to solve.
Yep, I'm pretty excited by Google AMP. I actually, with an engineering background, appreciate that the barrier of entry is much higher on a technical level, and by fulfilling that barrier of entry, you're actually guaranteeing something to the user. So it creates this trust, and it fulfills this fiduciary responsibility that we have to our users. The problem is there's this huge early adopters fee that everyone's facing right now. Every publisher I talk to that is actually integrated with Google AMP or Facebook Instant is doing it in a different way, whether they're custom tailoring the articles to be supported in that format, or trying to use their WordPress blog to install a plugin to do it. There's a million approaches to take, but the experience in Google AMP still isn't quite there when you do that. So we took a step back and invested in the platform that we use to publish to these sort of walled gardens, so to speak. And what we're doing is building our underlying CMS to make it very easy to integrate with these, and then open sourcing that work and trying to get other publishers using this. So that actually has been fairly successful, and we know the Daily Beast and History.co and a few other publishers are now utilizing our tech and contributing to our tech to publish. And it's making it kind of easier for everyone in the industry to adopt these things rather than incurring this early adopters fee.
Leo?
Yeah, I'm in the necessary evil camp when it comes to AMP and instant articles on Facebook. I love what you're saying about, you know, the tech catching up to the speed and performance of these two platforms that are essentially, you know, using the excuse of, yeah, there's a lot of poor user experience sites out there on mobile web that don't load right, or they get greedy with pagination and ad load. I do think we're just kind of in the middle of a transition period where the cream will rise to the top, and you know, all the publishers sitting in this room, of course, are going to take matters into their own hands and their own tech, and they're going to compete with Google AMP, and they're going to compete with Facebook Instant Articles, and they're not going to be reliant on it. And so that's kind of the approach I want to take. And listen, the internet just kind of needs cleaned up a little bit. I don't think the internet's dead by any means. I'm a big fan of it. But I think it comes down to there's a handful of content recommendation companies that I won't name that people are taking advantage of right now. And these widgets are living on very reputable sites, and you're quickly taken down a rabbit hole of a pretty crappy user experience when you click through. And I think that's kind of the backlash, and until that kind of gets old or ends, or you know, Google just launched what is it called, Content Match. It's a widget to compete with that, and I'm all for that. I mean, if anyone's going to do it best, it's going to be Google. So it's a matter of they can increase the quality of the sites that they're linking to and still incentivize publishers on a monetization level, then it's going to be a win-win. So
let me just move into a couple of specifics based on things that have been talked about. First, Julia, I was going to ask about in AR or VR, where the user experience to some degree at this early stage is also dependent on like the headset company. You know, we've been doing some stuff at our journalism school at UT with Oculus, and you know, we'll design a certain way, and then something that sort of worked a few months before doesn't. Is that just going to have to be kind of something that you work around, or are there actually, is this sort of foreshadowing conversations that now will extend to whoever's making the devices that the user will be viewing?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, you know, out of the chaos, the cosmos formed kind of time in VR, and I expect there will be a lot of rabbit holes we'll go down that we'll have to come back out of, and then go down another one as we figure out how to go. That's expensive. As publishers, you've got to pick your bets and ones you want to invest in. This happens to be an interesting one for us. But yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, it is helpful having conversations with the people who make the headsets, and sort of talk about it from a you know, a news consumption perspective, because there is no one says this is how news should be consumed on a VR device. There's no like template for that. And so we want to do a lot of experimenting in getting the things that are so great about news, right? The fast pace, the quick updates, you know, long form analysis. We want to figure out how best to tell those stories. So we're going to experiment with all that makes news great. And if you were running something like Oculus, you'd be thinking about what makes games great and what makes all these, you know, like shopping great, and everything you can do within a VR environment. I think publishers have a real opportunity to shape the conversation in this early stage with the experimentation. The only problem in this particular case is cost. It's a really expensive investment.
Right. And Tyler, I wanted to ask you about when you think of, so Bustle has a mission in terms of an intended sort of audience, both in terms of gender, age. How does that affect thinking and conversations about UX? You know, how do issues like gender and age come in?
I think a lot of the demographic focus is done through the editorial content and just overall content. I think the experiences we're trying to create are somewhat universal. I would hope that they are. And that I think design, branding, and editorial really own that. And on our front, on the engineering side and technical side, it's to just build the best products we can, utilizing the medium, which is the browser or your phone.
And Leo, I'll ask you this, but I'll sort of set it up. When I left the Washington Post in 2010, as Julia will remember, there was nothing like the engineering culture that exists there now. There's like 60 or some engineers in the newsroom. I think when the early mobile app was sort of outsourced, right? So my question to you is, starting a newer business and company, how did you think about an engineering culture, from the get-go, and how important is that?
We didn't out of the get-go. It was, we were just more worried about creating the best content, and the means to get it out there at the time when we started was WordPress VIP, and we're actually still on it. And it's kind of one of those things that, as the site grows and the audience grows and the bandwidth bills and the hosting bills grow, that's a good bill to get. The bigger your bill is, the more traffic you're getting, until we kind of saw that plateau a little bit. And then that's when we did start taking tech seriously. And we outsource a lot of our web development to this day, but we have an entire in-house massive team of mobile developers that we keep pretty close to the chest, because it's like follow your audience. Our audience is on our app, our apps. And so, yeah, it's definitely something that we invest heavily in. And but then in terms of investing in new development and new platforms, we're like with the Roku thing and tvOS, there's still some dev companies that are getting their feet underneath them, and they can talk a big talk, but it's still working with these new platforms and figuring it out. And so we can't do that in-house. We have to rely on these third parties. But
So I'm going to ask two more, and then we'll open it up to the audience. And I'll sort of say both questions so you can be thinking about them. We'll take them in order. The first question I'm going to ask is sort of put on the crystal ball and talk about some, quite big bets that you or your organization might be making in the UX space. And then the second question I want to ask is, what do you think is the biggest, if you had to pinpoint one biggest frustration right now from the user perspective, what is it? So let's start with sort of looking forward and big bets. So we'll start with Leo and come this way.
Sure, yeah. Well, I mentioned Chive TV. That's our biggest bet right now. That's probably the biggest opportunity to scale, because there's many ways you can kind of manufacture reach online and on social, but it's fleeting, and there's other platforms turning the knobs on you. Whereas Chive TV, we can literally pay to scale that. The product's proven itself. The bars really like it. The patrons really like it. And to that end, it's just a matter of how fast can we get into every single venue with a one-to-many captive audience. And then I'm pretty bullish on newsletters, actually. You look at the landscape, and everyone's creating all this awesome content. And again, we don't have as much control to get our content to the users that say they want us. Hey, I'm going to follow your brand on Facebook. Well, good luck. If you're part of that 3% that gets a link from us, you'll get it. But I think newsletters are a very active way for your audience to say, hey, I want your stuff, send it to me. And so from a UX standpoint, we just did a whole new redesign, worked with the Post Up crew here. They've been great. We're actually switching over to them as our main ESP, and really capitalizing on that audience we've built over the past 8 years. And we've got millions of subscribers to, quite frankly, a really crappy newsletter. So we're just kind of stepping our game up there on the user experience within newsletters.
Tyler, big bets?
I think our biggest bet is investing into our platform with engineering and product effort. And the reason we've chosen to take that route is I want to be able to know exactly how long it's going to take to build a certain product. So when we own the platform and we built it knowing what the next year looks like in product, that provides us with the most flexibility to actually execute on that. And the platform that we're trying to build is in order to enable us to have these interactive products, to launch them quickly and turn them around. And then also having a culture of open sourcing all of that and letting engineers work in the open, pushing them to give talks to hopefully provide tools that the industry can actually use to make the whole experience around the web better.
Julia?
We've talked a little bit about virtual reality and AR. That's a big bet for us at this time. I will say, I think, and part of this is my background, but For us, what we really want to do is push forward with different kinds of storytelling on specific stories and see what we can learn. We're doing some analysis this week around the way people describe themselves when they're in their Twitter bios, followers of Clinton versus followers of Trump. Like, that's a very interesting news problem, but it's also been a very interesting data problem, right? We've had machine learning experts kind of looking at this data. For example, strong conservative on the Trump side, strong coffee. Beer, wine. You know, that's really interesting analysis. That's journalism, but that's really taking advantage of all technology has to offer. So that's where you'll see us excel. Last night, I noticed with some interest, Hillary Clinton's campaign had put out, you know, this pretty cool experience. It was like Shuffle. I don't know if any of y'all saw it, but it was like Shuffle to see what Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were doing in the same year. And it's so cool. It's mobile first storytelling, and it's marketing, and it's trying to get campaign dollars. You know, and it's better than what I've seen on a lot of news sites. So I'm positioning our team to really try to focus on those kinds of experiences, see what works, what doesn't, and then scale those. And they could work for us or for brands.
And we'll end with just, if you had to quickly say, just list one frustration that still sort of you hear about, know about, that exists right now.
Not enough time and money. I mean, the limits of time and space, I think, is a big one. You can't take on everything. That's one of my biggest challenges. Is like, if you look at the landscape for news about, you know, more people are what we used to say at the Washington Post, right? We were reaching more people than ever, and so trying to find ways to more deeply engage those audiences, have them through newsletters or other means, sort of become subscribers with their time, if not their money, but hopefully their money in some way. You know, that is. You know, the monetization question still is not figured out for my business. And so trying to work through that is, you know, a big focus of what I try to do, just keeping the user first in that conversation.
Yeah, if there's anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, biggest frustration is keeping up with all the, you know, people's share of voice. And I equate share of voice as your share of time of day. How much time do people have to really kind of read news articles, watch fun videos, or go through galleries? And, you know, you've got some behemoths out there that are taking a lot of audience share, like Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook. And so it's constantly just competing for people's time of day. And then ad block.
Really just balancing all the pieces from ad operations, editorial, vision, branding and design identity, and then actually engineering something that satisfies all those needs while still keeping the user first in the conversation.
Great. I think we'll have time to go to your questions. Yes, sir. I think there's a mic coming.
Tom McGurn, Perform Media. Curious, I think at the end of the day, we're all curious about how do we make money. And that is our main priority, I think, which really hasn't been mentioned over the last couple of days. We talk a lot about futuristic things and process. I'm curious about the runways you guys are given in your organizations to prove out a concept, and you know, what the revenue expectations are around some of these sort of big bets you're doing. Because, you know, I think we've all agreed that, you know, Facebook Live and some of these others just we're not able to make money on them yet. So, you know, next, you know, at the end of March in 2017, you know, we all have to go to our bosses and say, did we make money? And so, curious about that.
Yeah, I'd say make hay while the sun shines on certain platforms. You know, there's a lot of publishers out there, and we're guilty of doing it, that are pro bono publishing. It's like, hey, we're gonna do a live video here. We're gonna mess around on Snapchat Discover program, and at the end of the day, it is follow the money. I hate to say it, but if you can't capitalize on the revenue generating opportunities we have now, we don't have the luxury of making we'll make money later approach, like, because you may not be able to do it. So it's I'd say monetization first in that aspect.
We're definitely focused on revenue. I would say probably 95 or 96% of our revenue came from traditional ways of displaying advertising. And we still, I believe the engineering product teams that I work with were provided enough autonomy to experiment, but we're still expected to deliver on that other 96%.
For me, it's a matter of resourcing. One thing I often say to my counterparts in editor and business is like, look, I manage cost. Anything is possible in this universe, right? It's just a matter of the cost of what you're going to do, how much you're going to invest in that. So generally speaking, I see my role investing quite heavily in the place we monetize best, our O&O sites. But I want to, because I believe in it and the future and all that stuff, and I want to invest in other things. I sort of reserve some of my budget for that. So it's really just a matter of, which way are you going to cut your cake? I get a fair amount of leeway because I'm able to deliver on the other part of the cake.
One more here. Hey, actually, Thursday. How's it going? I had a question for Leo at Chive. So I love the OTT thing, the Roku stick thing, how it's going. Yeah, I was reading about it, and it said that you guys have a deal with Royal Caribbean, I think, right? Mm-hmm. So did they approach you, or were you kind of shopping it around after you had this idea?
They approached us,
oh, really?
Which is great. Yeah, it's kind of one of those things that, rewinding back to why we started with Chive TV in general, it was a marketing vehicle for the Chive. It's like, all right, how are we going to either tap people on the shoulder who used to be fans of the site, or tap people on the shoulder who've never heard of the Chive? Hey, I like this content. We used it for running house ads through. It's like, hey, you like this? Download the Chive app. Hey, you like this? Go to our store and buy a T-shirt. And then we realized pretty quickly that great, we get the ancillary effect of our branding, but then we realized that the alternative out-of-home advertising market was massive. And then the third effect, which I'm referring to with your question, is we got someone from Royal Caribbean who's sitting at a bar watching this, and he's in charge of programming content on two 25-foot LED screens, and he's like, this is perfect. And so we get a ton of inbound requests because we're still scaling our install team at this point. So it's kind of going viral locally, so to speak. So that just landed in our lap, and we'll take it.
Do we have time for one more?
Sure, yeah.
And one more if there is.
Any?
I have a question for Leo. Yeah. Where's the brick wall that I can walk through on my way to work?
I watched that like 10 times last night.
It's here, isn't it, somewhere?
Is it here today?
I don't know.
I don't know. What he's referring to is it's an energy drink sponsor that created a brick wall, much like the Kool-Aid man running through a wall. And we put it in front of our front door. Our office is like 100 yards from here if anyone wants to stop by. And our employees showed up to work that day, and they couldn't get in the front door unless they ran through this fake brick wall.
Right. Would you have a question here? Oh. Yeah. Okay. All right, last one here.
Hey, Justin Webb from the Dallas Morning News. I was wondering how you guys felt about programmatic native, like full article programmatic native, and if you felt like that sort of crosses the user experience line, or if that's good for you guys.
I think it crosses the line.
Yeah, crosses the line.
Sure, hey, I'll get it in there.
Okay, we have it. That's decisive. It crosses the line. Thank you, guys. Can we give a big hand to our panelists and the RB? Thank you. And next up, I'm going to introduce myself. Cora, the Vice President of Strategy and Business Development and for Digital Media for Playboy Enterprises. Is that, did I get your title
That's
correctly?
perfect, yes.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Sorry, forgot I need that. This is termed a fireside chat. I don't see the fireplace. There's supposed to be a bear rug here too, but I guess we dropped the ball on that. But get your cocoa, pull up a chair. So we all know, I think at this point, like Playboy has undergone a really big reinvention over the last 2 years. The decision to drop nudity first from the site and then from the print magazine. Can you just kind of take us back to and tell us what originally sparked the decision to, and the thinking that the magazine, that you needed to reinvent and that there was some untapped potential out there that you could reach by dropping nudity?
Sure. Thanks, Eric, for having me. Okay. I think to sort of walk through the whole thinking process, you have to really look back to the original founding principles of the magazine in the 50s and 60s. Society was really going through a tremendous change. Segregation was ending. Women were starting to get into the workforce, and the pill was starting to be approved by the FDA. And Playboy magazine was really founded in response to what was going on, because the media at that time was pretty whitewashed and Puritan. You had shows like Leave It to Beaver, Andy Griffith's show. They weren't really representative of what was going on in society. So, the story, I think most people have heard. Hugh Hefner, he borrowed $1,000 from his mom and assembled a magazine on his kitchen table and bought nude photos of Marilyn Monroe, and what you might call 1950s clickbait to get people to buy the magazine. But he surrounded it with a lot of articles. The joke that I just read it for the articles is it works because there's
Based on
actually
truth.
content. Yeah, exactly. So, we like to see Playboy as one of the original disruptors, an advocate for civil rights, LGBT rights, legalization of pot, all these issues that weren't cool back then, but Playboy was an advocate for. So in general, progress, freedom, exploration, these are all fundamental principles of the magazine. And we did this while having a good time. So you'd see a picture of a naked lady next to an interview with MLK. So it's really the high-low that we were going for, and really a guide for the modern man. So you fast forward to 2013, and we had social media profiles out there that weren't very active, but we had a lot of fans. And social media tends to lend itself to the high and low. You'll get videos of cats, obviously, but then you'd get, a campaign to end ALS at the same time. So it really played to Playboy's strengths. And we started interacting with fans, and we found that we were very successful, but unfortunately we didn't have anywhere to send people to, because the Playboy.com website wasn't run by us. It was run by a partner, and it was essentially an affiliate link site to adult content. We couldn't send people there. So we decided in August 2014, to actually relaunch the site, make it completely safe for work, remove all nudity, and we saw traffic increase 4x. Average age went down to close to 50, down to 30, and over a third of the visitors visiting daily, on a daily basis. So that sort of provided the impetus to make the change in the magazine. And if you take a look at the magazine, I don't know how many of you have seen the new issue. We still have photography of women, but in a much more natural light, in a much more natural environment. And the format is different, the articles are different. It's all updated for a younger generation.
So just to be clear, is the need to sort of leverage that social distribution, that big success you were seeing there, that drove the decision?
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the deciding factors for sure. I think all these social platforms are very careful about nudity. I see it a lot still on Instagram, right? But I think
it's out there.
Yeah, when you come from Playboy, you're held to a higher level of scrutiny for sure, because of that 60+ year history. So we have to be very careful about that in order to pass the muster of all the social networks. And fortunately, this announcement in the magazine really led the way for us being greenlit on a lot of other platforms.
Cool, and we'll get to that in a second. But you mentioned something interesting on the aesthetics of the photos, and how can you kind of explain how that's also influenced by social media?
Yeah, absolutely. So when our editors were in a room and they had images in our war room trying to figure out what the aesthetic of the magazine was, something really stood out, and those were all the images and videos taken on Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook and that whole selfie movement. And these women were basically owning their own image in a very natural way, generally not produced in just natural environment. And if you look at the old Playboy, especially in the 90s and the 2000s, if you look at how the women are posing, it's in a very unnatural way. I've never seen women pose like that normally, at least not for me. And it was very staged, and you had fake body parts. And so what we did was we made it a lot more natural. If you've seen the cover of our March issue, it's basically an ode to Snapchat. You see our model sort of taking a selfie of herself. And that's the direction we wanted to head. It's much more modern. It's about women owning their own image and sexuality.
No retouching, I think.
No retouching, that's correct, yes. We will do some color correction, but we won't hide any blemishes or anything like that. It's not all smoothed out like the old Playboy.
Yeah, it's sort of natural. And so you mentioned the decision to drop nudity has obviously opened some doors. but before we get to that, you mentioned someone else was handling the website before you. It was outsourced.
Yeah, it was outsourced to one of our partners, and it was purely an adult site, basically. Yeah.
And so when you brought it in house, you basically had to rebuild the entire site.
Yeah,
right?
we actually built it from scratch. We made it mobile responsive and all that, so we were able to build it from the ground up. Absolutely.
What percentage of traffic is coming from mobile at this point?
Currently, it's close to 3/4 of traffic from mobile, so it's pretty significant.
So is it safe to conclude that from that people are, they're looking at Playboy out in public, maybe at work or on their commute sometimes?
Yeah,
Maybe sometimes.
absolutely. There's probably a bit of a stigma to it still, but we're trying to change that. We've got a bunch of native apps in the App Store. Most recently, we just got approved on Google Play and iTunes for the Playboy magazine for the first time. So we have a Playboy magazine app as well, a Playboy Now app, which is free, and a Playboy Classic app, which is more archival content.
Okay, from archival content, what does that mean in this case?
So it's some of the older photo shoots of our playmates from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. They've got some of the cheesy party jokes back in the day, and sort of what we call dad jokes that aren't that funny today, but a lot of our older subscribers and fans still enjoy those, and all the dirty cartoons that you used to see in Playboy. Yeah.
Those jokes they're funny because they're not funny anymore,
right,
which
exactly.
is why
Yeah.
they're funny again. So you have some advertisers. Can you tell us a little bit? And I think we have some slides. Maybe we can call them up. I have a clicker too. About some of the advertisers that you've been able to get to sort of recruit now that it's safe for work?
Yeah, so one of the first advertisers that signed up was Dodge, and that was significant because it was the first time in over 25 years that a U.S. auto manufacturer was willing to advertise with us. So it was a 360 ad campaign, involved print, events, and digital, and as you can see, that's a pretty creative that we came up with. We got some photos of old playmates. We cleared the rights for them in conjunction with Dodge, and they came up with this, I think, a pretty nice tongue-in-cheek four-page gatefold ad in our March issue, which was the first non-nude issue. And we also posted these images to Instagram and Facebook. We've got over 30+ million followers across all social networks, so that's a pretty significant part of the overall campaign. And then at our Super Bowl party, which is an annual party that we have, this was also the launch party of our first non-nude issue of the March issue. So we had Dodge branding throughout the party. There was a time tunnel that had both vintage Dodge and Playboy imagery as partygoers walked into the event. There was a Dodge Viper on the red carpet. A lot of celebrities were taking pictures with it, and the stop and repeat in the back. There was Dodge as well. We tweeted, Snapchatted, Instagrammed everything from the party. So it was a full experience, along with obviously digital inventory across the website.
Yeah. And I mean, as you can see here, and we'll probably see in some of the subsequent ones, it's Playboy is still very much about beautiful women, right? Not necessarily wearing a great deal, but but not nude, and that's a compromise. Sort of a middle ground that the advertisers are comfortable with, or some of them are proving comfortable with.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be a set of conservative advertisers that wouldn't touch us at all, but I think when advertisers are willing to work with us, they know what they're going to expect. They're going to expect, a bold, unapologetic, authentic voice that appreciates the female form. So we're going to show things like that. And we haven't really had any pushback. If anybody's looking to work with us, they know what to expect.
Yeah, it's Playboy. So
exactly.
It's not, oh my goodness,
Yep.
That's shocking. Let's see what we have next on the. Or am I doing this right? This is, I think, a social. Is that Facebook?
That's on. Yes, I think that's Facebook. That's the I think the Dodge Hellcat at the Super Bowl party. One of our playmates posing in front of. We had, I think, 20 of them there, and they were posing and taking pictures with partygoers around the car.
And there are still playmates.
There are still playmates. Yes, absolutely. That is one of our best brand ambassadors out there.
Yeah. Let's see. And this is.
So this was interesting. They, as part of the Hellcat campaign, we set up a whole section in the Super Bowl party with a hologram. So that's sort of a computer-generated Hellcat, I guess, is what you'd call it. And it was, and people were taking photos around it, and our playmates were standing by as well.
Okay. Let's see. I think there's you've had some other campaigns. So this is for the Hateful Eight.
Yeah,
right?
the Quentin Tarantino film Hateful Eight last year. We did a really interesting campaign, which I think is something only Playboy could execute. We work with Tarantino's team to design some limited edition T-shirts that featured Playboy-like imagery along with the Hateful Eight, and we had 3 Playmates actually shoot custom videos revealing the shirt and also promoting the movie. And at the same time, we worked with 6 additional Playmates. If you look at our top 30 Playmates on social media, that they amount to over 25, 30 million followers in total. So it's a pretty significant platform that we can leverage. So this is Carly Lauren, Playmate for a couple years ago, posing in one of the T-shirts, posting to her fans, and we've got a couple others, Tiffany Toth.
What else do the Playmates, when they're posting, do they post as Playmates? Is that their primary sort of like the way they're presenting themselves, or are they just sort of like, I was a Playmate at one point, now I'm doing my own thing?
I think the ones, there's a spectrum. So there's some that work with us very closely, and in those cases, they're always posting with the context of being a Playmate in general. That's what most of their fans know them as, and those are the ones we generally choose to work with.
And what kind of content, like other content, do they post when they're not doing like branded posts like this?
It's a lot of what you expect on social media. So what they're eating, some
Travel.
A new bikini that they got, travel,
exotic locations.
Yeah, with some sort of protein powder that they
Right.
are sponsoring because they had a great workout, stuff like
Pretty
that.
standard.
Yeah.
I think kind of thing you might see Kim Kardashian, or would have seen Kim Kardashian do before.
Yeah, exactly.
And speaking of branded content, how is Playboy approaching that? Do you have an in-house studio?
We do. We have an in-house studio and facilities in our Beverly Hills office. So we shoot a lot of custom content, content obviously for Playboy in general, and then we work with brands such as Dobel Tequila was a big branded campaign that we did. It was around Masters of Craft, and we shot 3 custom videos for them. These are all New York-based entrepreneurs. All these products are made in America. This is Ben Van Leeuwen. He has an ice cream truck in Brooklyn. And what he did, we shot his process and what he goes through, and he actually was able to incorporate Dobel Tequila into one of his ice cream flavors. So that was a pretty cool native way to get the product into the video.
Yeah.
Without seeming forced.
How many people do you have in your studio? Do you know?
It's pretty lean right now, so it's a team of 5 or 6 at this point. But
Sure.
yeah, we've been managing with it, and we'll hire and complement the team as necessary.
How much control do the advertisers have, or how much control are they willing to cede to Playboy in creating these campaigns? And do you ever have any freakouts, like maybe someone who hasn't heard about the Safe for Work thing being like, what are we doing?
As far as I know, we haven't had any freakouts for sure. As I mentioned, people expect a certain level of heat, I guess, when they work with us. So no complaints. They generally give us creative control, but ultimately they have the final approval on things like that. But for this campaign, the sponsor was very happy with everything, and all the other ones that we've had since the rebranding have been really, really successful.
Cool. You mentioned and I wrote about it yesterday. You guys are now available on iTunes and Google Play. What are some of the other new distribution? You told me that like half of your job is looking at distribution, expanding distribution.
Yeah.
What are some new channels that you're excited about?
Sure. We actually just launched on Roku a couple of weeks ago, which was really significant for us because Roku is a very family-safe environment. We were on the phone with them last year, and when we were just discussing this change, and they really didn't want to talk to us at all. The phone call lasted 5 minutes, but ever since the relaunch, even though we've been safe on digital for almost 2 years, but ever since we made the change to the flagship product, that's when people start to recognize everything, and that whole announcement got over 6 billion impressions worldwide. It was such a big media story. So, after that came out and we had a couple of months under our belt with the new content and the new format, a lot of our platform partners and advertisers were able to see what direction we were headed, and Roku was willing to approve us on their platform. So we just launched on Roku. We're also on the Amazon Video now as well. In addition, on Amazon Prime, we'll be launching in conjunction with them. We're co-producing a biography, a 13-episode biography on Hugh Hefner called American Playboy. So that's shooting now and will launch in April. Other platforms include, so I mentioned Amazon, Roku. We're looking at potentially doing things on chatbots. We're in discussions with Alexa. So the door's open for a lot of platforms at this point.
And anything with chatbots yet, or is that too early days?
It's early, but we're seriously looking at it. I think a lot of people sort of rushed into it when Facebook announced they were opening up Facebook Messenger, and I think a lot of these chatbots ended up being glorified RSS feeds and not very interactive. So I think there's a great opportunity. People want to interact with Playboy. I think there's some obvious things we could do. The Playboy Sex Advisor it's a franchise within the magazine, and there could be a Sex Advisor app or Sex Advisor chatbot potentially. So we have to be careful about it, of course. We don't want to piss off Facebook, but there are a lot of ideas floating around there for a chatbot.
And I have one last question, then we'll open it up for Q&A. This is very silly, but can people still find naked pictures on Playboy anywhere if they wanted to?
Just curious.
I'm asking for a friend.
Yeah. So
I'm asking for all my
if you
friends.
try really, really hard, yes, you can. Now, on Playboy.com proper, you won't find any naked pictures. But we do have a couple of products out there. Obviously, there's Playboy TV, which is a subscription channel with MVPDs right now, and there's an OTT channel, and also a product called Playboy Plus, which shows nudity. Now, those products were previously operated by a partner as well. We've subsequently taken ownership of those back, so we can control the brand a little bit better, since we want to have a unified message across. For the time being, we still have those products out there, and we don't promote those on social, via the main Playboy accounts. But we do have links to them from Playboy.com. Those are subscription products. You can't see them for free. They're age-gated and all that sort of thing. So it's behind us.
So you really have dropped the sort of a cloak over the nudity.
We have, definitely. Yeah.
And I hear that you can find it on the internet and other places.
That's what I
too,
hear
if
as
you
well.
want it.
Yeah.
I'm just
Yep.
you don't need to go to Playboy anymore. So on that note, I'll leave you and I'll get this microphone and we'll do some Q&A, audience Q&A. Anybody have any questions for Channing?
Sure. Yeah, I think traditionally people would lump us in with Maxim and GQ and Esquire, and those are valid in the sense that they're traditional magazines and are pretty storied brands. But we also sort of go against a lot of times in advertising RFPs against folks like Vice. I think the Chive, obviously them, and even to a very low extent, but not from an advertising dollar standpoint, but their sites, Snapchat channels like Arsenic TV. I don't know if you guys are familiar with them, but they're sort of doing a lot of user-generated content and snaps. I don't know how they're monetizing that yet, but that sort of enters the conversation as well.
Anyone else? Stand up and say your name and where you're from. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Howie from Media Radar. Quick question. You mentioned Dodge earlier. Were they not an advertiser before you guys kind of cleaned up? Or?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, we didn't have any money from Detroit.
So how did you go from zero to all? I mean, they must have spent a lot on that.
Yeah, it was a pretty significant campaign. They actually contacted us when we were making the announcement. They over 25 years ago, they were advertisers, and we had been advertising with some European manufacturers, such as Mini Cooper was a sponsor 3 or 4 years ago, and even in our international editions, there are a lot of auto. So once we announced it, they actually came to us.
Anyone else? I have a question. How much do you subsegment your audience? Like, is it the audience pretty homogenous? Like, in some ways, I imagine it is age-wise or
Yeah. It's close to 90% male for obvious reasons. We do do retargeting on social for people who have seen a specific campaign, so we can segment by that. We leverage first-party, third-party data on our DMP to segment by specific interests, especially around the spirits category. That's a big advertiser for us, so we can tell what portion of our audience are more interested in brown liquor versus just vodka or beer. So we can segment pretty granular around that area, and we're looking for more categories to do that with.
Okay, cool. One more.
Hey, what's up, Channing? Have you guys separated your print and digital sales teams yet, or is it still kind of?
No, they're completely one team right now. Yeah, that was something that happened along with the relaunch of the website. It's really important for us to do that. The one that was just announced this week is subscription based. So it's a subscription. You can either buy it on a per issue basis or an annual subscription. That's the actual magazine in app form. There's another app called Playboy Now, which basically mirrors a lot of the content on Playboy.com, and that one's free and ad supported.
Other questions? If not, we will go to our roundtables. We have 2 roundtables. One is on UX. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. That's my bad. Thank you, Jennings.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Roundtables, one on